Oh, great.
Hello, hello.
Hey, what a treat. I'm telling you, this is just such an honor. Um,
Nice
I
to
don't know
meet you,
what to
Alan.
same here. Is it Ivan or Ivan or how do you
Ivan, yeah.
Ivan? Great. And Bryce Callahan, the secret weapon of this whole university, is recording this. He is I just graduated from university here with a degree in computer engineering, and he's been hired as the webmaster for our whole college.
Oh,
So
fantastic.
he's a lot of the exhibitions that you might have seen
hmm
are his design and expertise. So it's been wonderful. Um, I just wonder if we could take a minute. I think we're recording, if that's okay with you already, and
Yeah, yeah.
Bryce can edit this. But I think there have only been. Well, I should introduce myself. By the way, I'm Alan Blum, and I'm a professor and endowed chair in family medicine at the University of Alabama College of Community Health Sciences, which is the medical school in Tuscaloosa. And I have the honor to interview Ivan Marković, who is, I don't know how to describe him, one of the most diverse and remarkable professors and polyglots I have ever read about, but more about that in a minute. But there have only been about a half a dozen times that I can recall in close to 50 years of working on the tobacco issue where I literally chucked out all my predetermined biases and just was, well, that's so much. I thought I knew a lot, but no, your article, Fashioning Smoking Space, a sensory historical geography of the smoking suit from olfactory barrier to dernier cri, which was published in Geographies of Fashion and Style Forum, um, in a geo-humanities journal. I mean, this is all out of my realm, but I'll have you explain more about that was so revelatory that, and how I found it, obviously with a regular internet search, but it stood out. I just, the most wonderful thing about any talk or any article is that you have your reader or your audience going out saying, gee, I never thought about it like that before.
Mm.
And that's what you did for me when I was looking for the history of the smoking jacket, because we're doing an exhibition um, called Wear a Cigarette Today, which is a
Mm.
takeoff on a slogan by a cigarette introduced in the 1980s or 70s by Lorillard called Max, sort of Max Factor Cosmetics type, very cosmetic oriented with fashion throughout their advertising. And so
hmm
I extended Wear a Max Today to Wear a Cigarette Today, and I have a lot of Marlboro collectibles clothing and camel boots and other fashion trends in the 1980s and 90s that came about because of the restrictions on cigarette advertising. That
Mm.
gave me the idea to focus on this one element of circumvention of regulation, looking at the very beautiful clothing that these cigarette companies produced and synonymized their cigarette brand with fine clothing. But
Mm.
I almost checked that whole agenda out the window when I read yours because simply filling in the blank of looking for the smoking jacket, all I knew about the past was that the tuxedo
Yeah.
uh, was was created by Lorillard, one of the Lorillard people, when he didn't
hmm
want to wear the long coat and tails for evening wear. So he chopped it off. And eventually he used that, which he named Tuxedo after the club that he belonged to in upstate New York.
hmm
He used that to smoke in. So, in any
Yeah.
event, that's about all I
Yeah.
knew. But if you would mind taking it from there by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you became one of the most well-rounded individuals I've ever heard of, and and then how you came to write this article.
Oh, well, first of all, Alan, thanks so much. You are far too kind. Far too kind. Yeah, and thanks for the invitation. This is something I've been working on for the best part of a decade. So it's really nice to kind of have these kind of conversations. Just about my background, really. I've been trained in cultural studies and critical theory. That's where my PhD was at. And if one is at all familiar with cultural studies as a subdiscipline, it's a very kind of British centered subdiscipline that emerges in the 80s with figures such as Stuart Hall and Raymond Williams earlier on. So that's the kind of tradition I was brought up in. And one of the key lessons there, and one of the things that was absolutely revelatory for me, came about during my master's, which was similarly in cultural studies, and that was that the everyday matters, that the things we say or do and experience, and they're not that often remarked upon, that these things matter. So I guess that was where my interest started. And this was back in 2014, I think. And back at that point, I used to
You
smoke.
look like you must have been in high school in 2014.
I was just about starting my master's. So I was in my mid 20s then. But by that point, I've been smoking for a good 10 years. And it was at that moment that I kind of started to think about my smoking as something more than just a habit and an addiction that I picked up from my friends. And that's what kind of got me on the path of investigating uh, not only the everyday, but also the historical elements of this practice. And what's more is that I'm Croatian original. So when I came to the UK, I faced a very stark difference in how smoking is governed. Uh, as you well know, a lot of the countries in the West and the developed world, specifically places like the US, like the UK, and New Zealand, Australia, have very strict anti-smoking policies, and for good reason. The place where I came from, Croatia, was very was very loose on these regulations, even though they existed uh, formally. So even today, when I go back, I'm still very much affronted by this pall of smoke everywhere you go. It's it's very difficult to describe for someone who doesn't have that kind of history of knowing what it was like before a lot of these bans came into place. And I know when I speak to my students today, it's almost unimaginable for them to think about going to the pub and coming out absolutely reeking of smoke. So that's
That'll
kind
be
of, yeah.
Yeah, that'll be a great place to return to in a minute as we talk about the origins of the smoking jacket, about the reeking.
Mhm.
But because you have this wonderful, you don't mind if I say this wonderful accent, I had a feeling that English was not your native language. However, like
That's right.
Joseph Conrad, uh, the great writer, you
Yeah.
have something that I wished I had, which is that your English is better and your vocabulary and your writing is better than mine. And although I speak French, and know some Hebrew, I doubt that I could ever imagine writing anything in French as you do in English. So you speak how many languages?
It is, and it's got to a point. And to be fair, coming from quite a secure middle class background back home, I started learning English very early.
Mhm.
And it's come to a point, especially when I started doing my studies, where I thought in English. So, to be completely honest, I don't think I would be able to express myself fully in my native Croatian. So yeah, English is definitely the way I kind of think about and read all this literature. Yeah,
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 I looked up 6 or 7 words, by the way. It's just
yeah.
not just the. I think you do for the most part avoid jargon, and we'll get into your university background. But in fact, for that matter, you emigrated to England when you were about how old?
I was early 20s.
And you began smoking about 14. Do you remember what brand you bought?
Ooh, I think it must have been when I first started, and this was in high school. It must have been Philip Morris or Lucky Strike. or if money wasn't tight, it would be Marlboro Whites.
Yeah, Marlboro Whites, which you don't even have in this country.
Mm,
There's worldwide, there's about 120 Marlboros. In
yeah,
the United States, there's about 40, but people don't know that. I always say,
I
I
didn't
ask,
know that.
I
That's
ask the students,
fascinating.
just go to any store that sells cigarettes and you'll see them all lined up because that's part of the advertising of the unique identity. Oh, no, no, no. You don't go into a store and say, can I have a pack of cigarettes? You say,
Yeah.
can I have a pack of Benson Hedges Lights 100s Crush Proof like menthol,
Yes. Exactly.
120s, so that its length, its diameter, it's the brand name, it's the modifiers, it's the pack, and so forth. But I think that the whole notion of how the brand is synonymous with identity. Uh,
Yes.
and you can tell someone is pinching pennies when they have a brand that you never heard of,
Hmm.
uh, and they think they're
Absolutely.
saving money. But
Absolutely.
I think the other aspect in Europe, the difference between Europe and the United States is that we banned the advertising first. Uh,
Hmm.
whereas no, I'm sorry, let me get that straight then. That's not exactly correct. The earliest of the modern anti-smoking era was to stop smoking in public places.
Hmm.
And they were more enforced. So airlines, we were the first to do
Yeah.
banning on airlines. But Norway and a few other countries were the first to actually try to ban the advertising.
Hmm.
So that's when from they banned Camel cigarette advertising. Almost immediately, the companies came up with Camel boots, Camel travel, Camel adventure, Camel trophy. And so that didn't take very long to circumvent the Maginot Line of advertising restrictions. But it is interesting that in Europe, or so I hear, the enforcement of smoking regulations is very lax. So, I don't think anything has really worked effectively when you see the creativity of the lines of clothing. But in any event, as you moved into your academic studies, you attended where for university?
I went to the University of Nottingham in
Ah,
Nottingham, so that's the kind of the Midlands of the UK, and that's where I did my master's and my PhD.
and you're now currently on the faculty at.
I'm currently at the Durham University, still in England, although I myself live in Scotland, but the
Wow.
place I work in is north of England, and I'm in the geography department. I'm a
And
lecturer there.
it's took me a long time to understand what geography was and what a great field it is. I think I might have even gone into it if I thought it was more than just identifying capitals of states.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
quite seriously, how do you describe and how do your students get interested in geography and how that is applied to so many of the things that you're writing
Mm,
about in the everyday? And again, you also talk about the sensory,
yeah.
this synesthetic approach to what you do. So how did you get into that and how do you explain it?
Yeah, well, when it came to kind of pursuing an academic career later on, as someone coming from cultural studies and critical theory, that particular subfield is very much shrinking in the UK. And there's not many posts or even departments that specialize in that area. But a close second was cultural geography, which is a kind of sub-discipline of human geography. And human geography in the UK specifically is an incredibly interdisciplinary field. First of all, it's really big. And second of all, it's a very welcoming discipline for scholars across the social sciences and humanities. And I think that's also reflected in the discipline's subdisciplinary divides. So there's a whole areas of human geography that specialize in social geographies, economic geographies, political geographies.
So
Uh,
the journal GeoHumanities is where this
mhm,
particular article came. And
exactly.
who would be reading that when you say cultural historians, cultural studies individuals, but are you
Yep,
intersected? Do you intersect with historians? Because yours is
absolutely.
yours is basically a historical article. One thing,
Yeah.
by the way, I just have to say that was so terrific about what you did in 37 footnotes and 46 references. There were only about six that were actually had tobacco in the title. You came
Mm,
from it from an entirely different direction, which I had never
yeah,
thought of, which was the fashion world.
yeah.
And so I mean, we could cut right into that particular article, but that's an example of something that is cultural geography. But what would be other examples before you talk about this of other well-known cultural geographic studies in the field that people remark about? What other everyday life situation has been elucidated through cultural studies that you like to cite?
Oh gosh, where do you begin?
Mhm.
Everything and anything, such mundane things as queuing,
Yeah.
buses, transport, uh, television, essentially everything and anything that's part of your everyday has some significance, whether it's political, social, economical, or cultural. And nothing is really beyond the pale here.
And the
Uh,
point being, and the point being is that you see that and you say, "My gosh, I've been doing this all my life, and I hadn't realized all
mhm,
this confluence that has brought me to this point." In fact, I suppose we could talk about digital media addiction,
oh yeah.
which is what we're part of right now. But
Mhm.
how is it that we have gone from, the old commercial, you went from 0 to 60 miles an hour in 3.2 seconds. Um, we've gone from 2005 or to now from 0.00 hours of a high school student on media to 11
Yeah,
hours a day.
yeah,
In 20 years, our mind has been occupied, almost half of our active mind, by devices. I'm sure
absolutely,
that's been done to death, but it certainly is not over.
absolutely, absolutely. And this is precisely the kind of things that cultural geographies and cultural studies and these kind of approaches start paying attention to. And that's why smoking for me was so interesting because for a lot of the 20th century, for most of it, it is the quintessential social habit of the age. It is so pervasive as to make it invisible. Right? And that break that happens, I mean, we see reductions from the 70s onwards, but especially in the UK from the mid 2000s when the first bans come in, uh, suddenly this whole atmosphere that is filled with smoke slowly starts to dissipate. So I think that's kind of also one of the reasons why I was so interested in looking at it historically. Primarily because I come from a school of thought, you can call it Foucauldian or whatever it is, that uh, values the past very much, and not for its own sake as something separate from us, but as something that is informing the present.
Right.
So,
Nostalgia can be dangerous,
mhm,
especially with nationalism and so
mhm,
forth. And you mentioned, I think the word nationalism comes up in terms of
mhm,
19th century masculinity and smoking. Uh,
absolutely.
so, and I think what, again, we'll dissect this in a minute, but from masculinity to feminization of smoking, from compressing time with a genteel pipe and cigar that take a half an hour to the 5 minute cigarette.
Yeah.
But there's something to me as you talk about now, and this compression of time into the present and bringing everything that's in the past that we were not aware of. But I'm wondering where conformity fits in and whether conformity, when it comes to smoking, is a pretty dire consequence. It's not a good thing. Nationalism is not a good thing. Conformity is not a good thing when it comes to smoking either. But have
Mhm.
you looked at that aspect of it as people smoke because the other person's smoking?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and that's one of the things that becomes quite prevalent, as I mentioned in our earlier correspondence. Uh, the book I wrote kind of spans a longer history from the uh, late 19th century all the way to the mid 2000s,
I haven't
and
gotten it,
that
but
is
I
a
will read it. What's the title again so we'll know?
it's the title is An Atmospheric History of Smoking in Modern Britain.
Right. And you include vaping?
I have an epilogue on vaping, yes,
Mhm.
but I have published previously on vaping as well, precisely as an extension of this kind of conformity.
And
That
apart from Hilton, I really don't know of many other authors who have touched on some of the things that you've written about.
There's been a few. Obviously, there's kind of more public-facing popular histories, like
Hmm.
Jordan Goodman wrote brilliant works. But in terms of academic histories, the field's not that big. You have Matthew Hilton, you have Penny Tinkler, Rosemary Elliott. They examined the kind of gendered histories of smoking. Victoria Berridge, she did a lot of work on the medical histories of smoking. But yeah, the field itself is not particularly. Oh, recently we have Sarah Milov's book, I think from Harvard, that's kind of dealing with some of the histories of smoking. But yeah,
Well, I always
the
wonder. I've read some reviews of that. I always wonder though, you know, when do you say that's all been written before? I didn't feel that way at all when I read your work, but I think there have been a number of
well, that's
histories
very
of
kind of you to
smoking.
say.
Well, but I'm saying quite seriously, as you yourself point out, we've looked at historical and we've looked at sort of we've separated it out, but I think yours, it's like wearing trifocals. You
Mm,
blend them all into one perspective that I had not realized, and you're going back and forth
yeah.
in just this article. So I guess from my standpoint, I came to this because I saw my father get a heart attack at a young age. He chain smoked. He started smoking when he was a physician.
Mm,
Smoked through the war in World War II, and that created a big impact.
yeah.
But as I went on to medical school, I didn't hear about this. It was only one half of one lecture in 4 years of med school in the early 70s. So
Yeah.
she talked about occupational health and all the, she used the term pulmonary cripples she was seeing. But that had an
Mm,
impression on me. I still stay in touch with her. Brigitte Namias is her name. And I started doing presentations myself, juxtaposing the advertisements to the patients with emphysema and other
mm,
diseases. So a
mm.
simplistic kind of approach, but it seemed to resonate. And as you know, the medical profession, two-thirds of which smoked up until the
Yeah.
50s,
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
not at all interested in this issue. My own chairman called me into his office in 1977 to ask me why I was talking to his secretary about her smoking.
Yeah.
He said, that's her personal lifestyle.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
I love that you mentioned that because one of the chapters in the book,
oh,
uh,
yes, hold that up, please.
yeah.
Yes,
This is the book.
great.
It came out this time last year, and it's coming out in
Great. At
paperback.
least I'm glad I wasn't too far behind seeing it, but I'm getting my
Yeah,
copy. Okay.
but one of the and one thing that I've noticed, I'm really pleased, and I'm very delighted and honored you said that my approach departs because a lot of the academic works that came out since the early 2000s focused on smokers themselves.
Yeah.
And for an understandable reason, especially during that time. What I have often found was missing from these narratives is the experience of non smokers. And one of the chapters from the book deals with the 1980s workplace in the UK. And it narrates a few stories of individual non smokers that tried to change and affect their smoke ridden atmospheres at work and what kind of uh, personal atmospheres were created as part of that. All sorts of animosity with colleagues, with superiors, line managers, even with the union. So this was precisely one of the kind of key elements that I wanted to foreground. That these atmospheres that I speak of, they're not just kind of aerial; they're very personal as well. They're toxic both in the sense of the biochemical toxicity of tobacco smoke, but also toxic in the types of relationships that can emerge in a place like the workplace where you have to be at, and you're at the mercy, essentially, especially at that point, you're at the mercy of your colleagues, and your line managers, and there's so little you can do to change the atmosphere you're in, but you still persist and you still try and do something about it. And it was very interesting. One of the stories that came from a secretary worker in one of the hospitals in the early 80s, just outside of London. She wrote a very moving and a very angry letter to her superior and the chairman of the hospital, complaining of her colleagues smoking. And she went even to those lengths to cite the most recent literature, because it was the early 80s that we have the first evidence of secondhand smoke from Japan. So it's such an interesting story of all the different techniques non-smokers try to employ to get rid of this toxicity, whether it's formal complaints, whether it's humor, trying to laugh it off, taking the mick out of each other, right? But yeah.
So the analogous instances in the U.S. Began with Donna Shimp. She was a telephone operator in New Jersey, working for Bell telephone company, and she couldn't take the smoking, so she tried to ask that there be a different policy, and they wouldn't listen to her. So she took the Bell to court, and she won her case. They had to ban smoking in the workplace. And do you know the way that the judge ruled? It was because they found a document was found from the company telling the electrical engineers or whatever, no smoking around our sensitive equipment under any circumstances.
Wow.
So it had nothing to do
with
with the sensitive human beings that were being affected. It had to do because they couldn't explain why they were so concerned about smoking affecting the sensitive equipment, but not about their own employees.
That's fascinating.
In Miami, I have a vacuum. I'm kind of a zealot because although I didn't know Donna personally, I followed that case, and I was in Miami as a resident in family medicine at the time when I read about a woman who got on an elevator in her apartment, and a guy was smoking a cigar, and she contacted the police and had him arrested because there was an ordinance on the books saying you could not smoke in elevators. That's about as far as we'd gone in the United States. Elevators.
Yeah.
And
that is fascinating.
Judge Dominic Koo in Miami, because no one was ever expecting this was really going to be enforced, much less go to court, but he ruled in her favor. Her name was Sabina Shalom, and she really showed the stick-to-itiveness to carry it through the stress and the ridicule that she got. But from that moment on, Miami became a leader in clean indoor air. Now, they tried to get a referendum in the county to have clean indoor air restaurants and other public places, but the tobacco industry spent $10 million to $10,000 of the proponents, but the referendum only lost by 400 votes out of 200,000. And the industry used such phrases on billboards as, think about this. This is Miami Beach, where a lot of retirees from New York go. The slogans were, "Don't let it happen here," which was an echo of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
That was billboards all over. Yeah.
Wow.
So we talk about what you've brought me to realize. I'm in a sea of history. I'm in a sea of cultural back and forth. It's not so simple. It hadn't simply evolved linearly. And I think that's an example.
Absolutely.
The other aspects of this, that's a great example. It has to do with the medical community. Yeah. Because I know when I started my group called DOC, or Doctors Ought to Care, in 1977, to agitate on this issue, get us out in the streets, we actually did what we call house calls. We went to the Miami Herald, which had lots of cigarette ads. We went to a Benson and Hedges movie promotion. We went to
sorry to interrupt. That had a lot of cigarette ads. That's what you
Yeah.
mean.
Well, they were promotions
Yeah.
masquerading cigarette ads in the Miami Herald, but also the Virginia Slims
Mm,
tennis tournament and the Benson and Hedges Film Festival were ways to
mm,
get younger audiences to go to events and see ubiquitous cigarette advertising because they couldn't be on TV. So they started sponsoring events, which
yeah.
were on TV, which is funny, cheaper
Yeah.
than the old commercials. But
Yeah.
the medical community had to be dragged kicking and screaming into this issue.
Mm,
And that's something that I think has been underappreciated. The AMA in 1997, when asked to explain why they never exerted any leadership on this issue, they claimed that they were duped by the tobacco industry, even though they had taken $20 million to do research that on stuff that we already knew. So that's a whole separate issue. But when did you, specifically going back to the issue of fashion, when did you make the connection? To me, as I understand it, smoking was pretty smelly and still is, and cigars and pipes were the main product used in the 19th century. Do we go back any further than the 19th century to look at people who tried to smoke but keep it away from others, or is it really Victorian where we began to celebrate smoking and make it a ritual with an enjoyable clothing and so forth? Does it begin really in the Victorian era, or does it go back earlier?
It's one of those things that I don't have a clear answer to, simply because uh, I was not necessarily in the business of trying to find an origin. What is clear is that from the very beginning, from tobacco's introduction to Europe, it has always been seen as a very ambiguous drug, always on this edge between disgust on the one hand and divinity on the other. And one of the earliest accounts that I know of is the 1604 counterblast to tobacco by King James IV, in which he decries it in the most horrific words. By the point that I became interested in the story was the mid 19th century. And this is the first um, the first time I saw smoking jackets and smoking suits being mentioned in the historical record. This is not to say that there isn't any before. It's just that I haven't found anything that predates or significantly predates the mid 19th century. In a lot of the collections I've studied, specifically from the Victoria and Albert Museum and the Bath Fashion Museum, that is commonly the point where all their artifacts and pieces emerge from, the kind of mid 1800s.
I will tell
Um,
you that I have over maybe 50 books on tobacco and art, connections with artistic things, and also cultural history. Um, the Central American uh, uh, use of pipes and so forth. But uh, I, until I read your article, I don't, and I've looked through all 50 since reading your article. I have seen maybe two references. I even have several volumes of Cope's Tobacco Plant, and I have
mm,
over half a dozen volumes of the 1890s and 1880s tobacco trade weekly called Tobacco. And
mm.
I've combed them, and there's been just almost no references to sartorial relationships with smoking.
Yeah, same. I just couldn't find anything. And the bits and bobs I did find, usually in fashion history books, uh, treated the attire very superficially and very often without references. So it was taken for granted. A lot of the uses were just taken for granted and kind of assumed. So I just started to try and dig deeper and find
Hmm.
what was this like in practice. What were they
Let me,
used for? When? How? Who were the tailors? So
I
yeah.
love the way, can I just read what you wrote here? This is the part of the early part of your article. This paper takes the fashioned body and the
Hmm.
fashioned smoking body specifically as a key geographical space. You've borrowed that phrase from another author, but to investigate the place smoking dress had in the sensory constitution of gender and space,
Hmm.
drawing on a wide range of primary sources. This is what I love, from newspaper uh, uh, and magazine articles to etiquette books, advice manuals, fashion plates, and trade journals. The paper examines the representations of the smoking suit, jacket, and gown from the mid 19th to the early 20th century and the role it was ascribed in the constitution of gendered smoking spaces. And one more, overall, you wrote, by weaving through the textures, smells, and places associated with it, the paper attempts to tease out the sensory, affective, and embodied micropolitics of wearing as this plush item of smoking fashion moves from the private space of the home to the public spaces of the fashion show. So that does bring me full circle to what I've put together on the Virginia Slims
Hmm.
Fashion Fair and the Ebony Moore Cigarette Fashion Fair. But go back to that leather, what do you call it, shoe leather research of looking at newspapers and
Hmm.
how you even found. I mean, to me, I think the whole paper is worth these
Yeah.
Selfridges ads that you found of
Hmm.
from men's smoking gowns from the early 1900s. But so a little bit about summarizing what you found and what you believe, but also how did you do it?
Well, it's one of those things that I have been, and I think a lot of historians might might not like this approach, but I'm a very big advocate of random keyword searches, especially in digital archives, because things like the topics I'm interested in are not treated concertedly. There are parts of our everyday life that don't necessarily get the same kind of attention as bigger themes in history. So the best you can ever hope for are tidbits. And one of the ways of very practically looking for these tidbits is to have a massive repository, such as the British Newspaper Archive has, of thousands and thousands of digitized pages of newspapers, from national ones to regional ones, spanning hundreds of years. So simply just starting with the most basic of keyword search to kind of find that nugget and then expand and build on was absolutely invaluable. I don't think this kind of work would have been possible without the digitized archive,
It's
because the things you find are in sources and in places that you would never in a million years even start to look into.
That's
Um,
encouraging because if you know Nicholson Baker's work, he
mm,
tried to save some of the original print newspaper archives
yeah.
and failed. And that's a sore spot with me because growing up, I went to the New York Times um, archive, which would, I mean, it was just like going to me to a candy store because I could sit all day with these massive volumes, but I don't even know whether there's any place you can still do that.
Yeah, and I mean just the time saved, because we have to remember. I mean, we as researchers, we don't have infinite amount of time and money to do our research. So just being able to do that in a time that's manageable and feasible is absolutely invaluable.
And
And then,
we hope that the preservation will be
mm,
there. But I've heard with when it comes to film that the best way to preserve film is film,
yeah,
meaning
yep,
that everyone assumes that it's digitization, but
yeah,
you know that floppy disks and zip drives, I wouldn't even know what to do with them today. And that's
yeah,
just 20, 25 years ago. Point
yeah.
being is that digital preservation has to be accessible and given the conglomeration of power by a handful of people, who knows whether we'll even have access to a lot of the things that we're being told we have
Absolutely.
access to.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah,
And it's
speaking of
one
the
of those
Epstein
things that
files.
we shouldn't underestimate the access to these databases and materials, which are available, not they're not really available to everyone and require incredibly expensive institutional subscriptions.
So
So how,
your work took you to even to Sherlock Holmes, and you read about Arthur Conan Doyle. So let's just trace. We'll start really with summarizing this wonderful piece. Um, you were interested in the ritual of smoking, and how it in Victorian England it became its own world of elitism, and the working man had a different kind of smoking. But
yeah.
the cigar required this ritual that involved segregation into a male
Yeah.
enclave, and then the clothing, winter clothing, summer clothing, different kinds of smoking. So could you just summarize how you just became amazed by this smoking jacket or smoking suit
Mhm.
phenomenon?
Yeah, so it was a lot of the kind of fashion history of that particular Victorian period, and specifically a very particular kind of man, a kind of middle class, upper middle class man, the kind of bourgeois figure. A lot of their sartorial practices would include different outfits for different occasions. One for the morning, one for the going out about town, one for the evening, and so on and so forth. And I believe I mentioned in the paper that one of the tailors from the period mentions that a gentleman, a proper gentleman, would change their outfit numerous times during the day. And one such occasion when an outfit would be changed would be after dinner. In the evening, as is commonly known, the men would retire uh, away from the dining room into either the gun room, or those that could afford, they had their own smoking rooms, or into a separate room, and leave the women, the ladies, to their own. Right? And as part of this movement into a different room, I found numerous articles, and it is partly part of kind of popular culture, that these fantastical pieces of attire, this velvet, the silk, the luxury, would be donned in order to smoke. So, smoking itself, for a very specific um, group of smokers, and here we are talking about the minority, because these items were reportedly incredibly expensive. And even the materials themselves, the silks, the velvet, their production, custom made, tailored by some of the best tailors
Kashmir,
in the
even
area.
Kashmir, you said.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it
Silk
was a
mostly.
very small group of people, very small group of men that could afford it.
So this would
Um,
be maybe one of the examples from your.
yes,
Yeah. All right. So
I love that picture.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, so they would retire to their separate space, don their smoking apparel, and light up their cigars. And a lot of the historical accounts I've read, and this is across sources, both people in the 20s reflecting on past days, uh, uh, um, even contemporaneous uh, uh, tr- uh, trading journals from tailors reflecting on the practice of wearing these suits. A lot of them would emphasize that one of the key purposes of wearing these heavy silk, velvet, cashmere pieces was to soak up the smell. Because if one thing that everyone knows is that smoking stinks. And it was true back then as it is now, especially if you consider all the various types of different tobacco that might have been available two people at the time. If it wasn't the high quality Virginia stuff, then it might have been the lower quality Turkish stuff, and it reeked. And this was one of the reasons why these well-off gentlemen would wear these items of clothing, which is where the gendered part comes in, because it's obviously a very gendered relationship. Not only in the sense that it's mostly, or the vast majority of smokers are men, but also because of the different understandings in terms of the sensibilities between the genders. So there's a very particular view in Victorian Britain, especially from the mid to the late 19th century, that views women's sensibilities, especially middle class and upper class, refined women's sensibilities, as very delicate. And smoke in this context was seen as very injurious, almost uncouth. So one of the main reasons to maintain this sensory divide between the clean, the delicate nostrils and sensibilities of women was to make as clear a break as possible. And one of the ways of maintaining this sensory barrier between the masculine smelly smoke of tobacco and the feminine sensibilities of non-tobacco or clean air was the smoking suit.
The King James, as you know, reversed himself about 20 years later, not even that long, when he realized how much money they were making.
Yep.
So I think if you do a flash forward 300-year quick history, we have something called slavery in between, combined with the fact that tobacco doesn't grow in England. I've read articles about why not. Climate-wise and soil-wise in the United States, the latitude of Connecticut is similar, and we have some of the best tobacco grown is in Connecticut, but that's for cigar wrappers. And then there is some snuff tobacco grown in Wisconsin, also in Ontario, Canada. People don't think of it as a northern crop, but I don't know to this day why tobacco was never successful in England. But be that as it may, a lot of wealthy tobacco barons were created.
Yeah.
And you can imagine that that was part of this kind of aristocratic element to smoking.
Absolutely.
Then when the Bonsack machine was introduced in the late 1880s, as you point out in your article, you got the compression of time from something that was a luxury, both in terms of expense and time, to something that you could do in 5 to 6 minutes. And then, horror upon horror, the smoking gown or the smoking jacket was, if not co-opted by women, it was introduced to women. So how did that change from suddenly being a purely masculine bastion to now, oh my gosh, now the women are getting in on this? Did that happen at the same time universal suffrage happened? Did it happen at the same time other liberation things happened?
I think it's definitely coincidental. It happens in concert. I think one of the kind of key elements, first off, is that the cigarette that comes pre-rolled, especially the ready-made one, after the invention and popularization of the Bonsack machine, is first seen as very effeminate. So there's still men that smoke for the most part, but the men that smoke cigarettes as opposed to cigars are generally seen as more effeminate, and it is usually tied to the figure of the dandy. It is the dandy that smokes the cigarette as opposed to the cigar.
But that all changed in World War I.
Exactly.
Because all the free cigarettes that the guys overseas were getting from the Red Cross, by the way, the American Red Cross.
Yep. Exactly. You're absolutely right. And it's also not surprising because of the cost, because of the time that was shortened buy the cigarette as a new technology of consuming tobacco and nicotine, it is not surprising that it become popular. And as you said yourself, is coincidental to wider social and cultural changes in terms of the gender dynamics with the suffragette movement and and the general political suffrage.
You start you. Oh, so go right ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, a lot of women started taking up the habit, and war was one of the key reasons why it became so popular across the genders. Because as Penny Tinkler herself notes in her book, it's just everywhere. Cigarettes are everywhere. You no longer need spend so much time and money to light up tobacco. You can have it everywhere.
And you
There,
didn't need permission from men to do it.
exactly.
But so we went from I don't know whether we can see this. We went from these
Mm-hmm.
illustrations that you provided. Let me see. Yeah, where you can see the contrasting, the different elegant jackets, the jacket and the longer robe, or the dressing gown became a morning robe. The
Yes,
men, our first image in this is actually a man walking into the boudoir with a, a bathrobe, but that was in fact his smoking jacket. But then
absolutely.
you found that suddenly women were being, I'll have to figure out a way to unblur this, but
Mm-hmm.
you found these incredible fashion collection, exclusive negligee wear, and so you described this the smoking suit of women, starting off with a little jacket, which was the smoking jacket for women, a lighter
That's
jacket,
right.
but then the notion that they could take off the jacket, and they would also have a kind of a loose gown, and that's how you start the article of that breakthrough moment when a woman was fully liberated and could literally just smoke as she pleased with
Mm-hmm.
that it came full circle really,
Yeah,
where women were now celebrating in smoking costumes as well.
absolutely. And that was, I think, the most surprising part of my research, and something that I was not expecting at all. Because as women start taking up smoking in the early 20th century, and especially from the 20s onwards, uh, unsurprisingly, they want to take up a lot of the culture, or reappropriate a lot of the culture that signified men smoking, some of which was the smoking attire. And but it very quickly becomes apparent that its original use is no longer needed. Or at least that's my suggestion. That's how I want to interpret it. Because however plush and expensive and luxurious these items were for men, they were there with the primary purpose of containing smoke. But since you are now a woman smoking, you have no one to contain it against. Uh,
Right. They also help by as you point out, introducing cherry flavored brands so that you would
exactly.
and floral aromas. Now
Yeah.
that continued, by the way, in the 1980s. There was a brand that was
Mm.
introduced in the U.S. called Chelsea,
All
and
right.
if you had the magazine ads for it, it was a scratch and sniff, and they said,
Oh, really?
at last, a cigarette that smells good, and you would scratch it and you'd smell it was vanilla.
Uh
It
huh.
didn't last long, but it just
Right.
shows you that 100 years later they were still concerned about the aroma. But so if you were to
Absolutely.
summarize where you've been and where you're going with this, and I know you're working on many things at the same time, um, how you alluded to your epilogue on vaping,
Mhm.
but bring us to sort of an elevator summary of where you've been and where you're going with this.
So yeah, so the almost the last stop in this history for me has been looking at vaping, particularly in the context of a lot of these histories. And one of the most interesting parts that I've noticed in researching vaping, and it's something you alluded to earlier, is these ideas of time and space compression. Because it seems to me that vaping might be the next step in this process. And what before took 5 minutes to consume and intake all your nicotine now is completely down to you. You don't need 5 minutes to press a button
Yeah.
and stop on the. You can take a couple of seconds. You can take a couple of minutes. So even in that space, a device that seemingly has or tries to depict itself as nothing to do with these morbid and very dark histories of smoking, and very much cannot escape them either. In addition to the most obvious thing, is that no one vapes tobacco flavored vape juice. It's no one
Yeah.
does it. It's
Right.
watermelon and candy
Mhm.
and apple and all these crazy flavors no one's ever heard of. Which
Mhm.
again, it's part of this sensory history of smoking. I want to suggest that kind of takes its next stage
Great point.
further.
In medicine, we can put an electrocardiogram on someone and follow them remotely. It's an ambulatory situation, and we can see when they're in their own settings whether they're having any certain events.
Yeah,
And I just wonder, I haven't heard of anybody doing this with vaping, but if you watch the students at the university vaping, it's almost every other second in some, or then it's 10 minutes later, but it's
yeah,
the accumulation is extraordinary. I'm told that there's more nicotine absorbed in vaping than in cigarettes. And this is what the so-called harm reductionists don't seem to want to acknowledge, that we just don't know what's
yep,
going to be the effect on the heart as we did. It took us 40 years, 40
yep,
years to
mhm,
understand that from the time that cigarettes became really, really popular in the 20s, it took until 1962 when the Royal College
yep,
of Physicians said proof positive this causes lung cancer.
yep,
I don't know how many decades it's going to take before we see the effects of nicotine dependence in this format.
yep,
I'm not saying it's going to cause lung cancer, but I think people are making very rapid conclusions on something that's
yep.
only been out for about 15 years.
Oh, absolutely. I would definitely agree with that. And that's one of the things that kind of made me very interested in it. Just seeing how much the vaping industry tries to set itself against its old old brother and have nothing to
Well,
do with it, but they're
believe it or
very
not,
willingly.
it's the same industry, and I'm told from Jeremiah Mock at the University of California in San Francisco that this is all part of a very concerted poly-use approach where they'll claim publicly, "Oh, we don't want people to smoke," just like they used to say to kids, "We don't want you to smoke because you're a teenager." Quickest way to get somebody to do something is to tell them not to do it. But the other thing, even though they have calmed down their overt cigarette advertising, they are claiming we want to get out of the business, but they're still selling an awful lot of Marlboros, and they're putting a lot of effort into the heat not burn and also into the
Mhm.
nicotine pouches, so that if you don't like one, you'll like the other, and you will, above all, be dependent on this chemical. Have you been, just as we wrap up, have you been invited, or would you like to conceive of a conference or a group where you and a smoking cessation expert, and you and a historian, have you been to conferences where you get an open discussion?
Not really. I think primarily because my interest is usually historical, and also because the kind of politics I'm most interested in is, as you mentioned earlier, the micro politics of what happens between and among people. So I think that might be one of the reasons. But also, to be completely fair, uh, with the publication of the book,
Let's show it
I,
again. Let's
yeah,
show it again. So, Atmospheric History of Smoking in Modern Britain. Love the title. Okay.
yeah. and a lovely, you probably can't see it on the camera, but a lovely image that I managed to get from the Imperial War Museum. They
My
have a
favorite
work,
museum, by the way.
you know, um, and so since the publication of the book, that was kind of my last chapter in terms of my work on smoking and vaping, and have
I
I've
cannot wait
since
till
moved on to other topics.
I can't wait to find out what they are and to stay in touch with you. It's I could go in a million other directions again, but you've evoked so much. I've spent decades on this issue, and you've got me more inspired than in recent times. A few other times, Elizabeth Crisp Crawford wrote a book on cigarette advertising in university publications, newspapers from the 20s through the 60s. That was just terrific. And Shane Smith is a military historian, does work on the history of smoking. I had no idea how much was going on in the early 1800s until I read his work.
Mhm.
And the Reverend Dan Morrison pointed me to the origins of the most popular song of the late 1800s, sung in colleges and universities, called "My Last Cigar." And he found
Yeah.
it was just such a great story of how these individuals have focused on areas that changed the way I've looked at issues entirely. But I can't thank you enough for taking time
Well,
to do this.
thank
I
you
know
so much for the invitation.
as soon as we close this, I'm going to think of 40 other questions and comments. But I'll look forward to posting our video, and I hope that you'll comment on the exhibition that we do as a whole. And
Yes,
again,
I'm really looking forward to seeing how the exhibition goes, and I wish you all the best with it. It sounds like a fascinating project.
well, thank you, Ivan. And if we had a budget, I would have brought you here in person, and we'd go out for dinner and have a great Croatian dinner or what have you. But
Yeah,
we'll put a rain check on that. And
sounds good.
thank you again for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alan. Thanks so much. Take care.
Okay, great. So we will stop recording. Right. Okay.